A man who lived to protect others, Jonathan Trent, a father, mentor, and beloved community leader, made his final sacrifice on the quiet evening of January 13th, 2025, inside Portland's Fred Meyer grocery store. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the evening calm, leaving him lying on the cold tile floor. His heroic act saved lives, but cost him his own. This tragedy was no random event. It was the first ripple in a conspiracy that would shake Portland to its core. As the 911 dispatcher's voice crackled over the call, panic and chaos echoed in the background. There's been a shooting. A man is down. Hurry! The chilling urgency in the caller's voice marked the beginning of a case that would leave Portland shaken. But what really happened that night? Why did Jonathan Trent, a man of quiet strength and unwavering integrity, end up in the crosshairs of violence? And more disturbingly, what secrets did he unknowingly uncover in the moments before his death? What if one man's final act of bravery exposed a secret that could tear a city apart? Jonathan Trent was no ordinary man. He was the kind of person who made you believe in humanity's capacity for good. A devoted father and beloved community leader, Jonathan's life revolved around protecting others, no matter the cost. In his neighborhood, Jonathan wasn't just a name, he was a presence. A coach who spent extra hours helping a struggling teen perfect his game. The same teen who would later walk across a stage to accept a full-ride scholarship, tears streaming down his face as Jonathan clapped louder than anyone. A father who, on quiet evenings, turned off his phone to laugh over a board game with his two children, treating each moment with them like a gift. Footage from a fundraiser shows Jonathan at the podium, his voice steady but impassioned as he urged the crowd to support local initiatives. "If we don't step up for others, who will?" he asked. His closest friend echoed this sentiment. That was Jonathan in a nutshell. He didn't just talk about stepping up, he lived it. That night, he proved it. To understand Jonathan Trent's story, one must first understand Portland, a city of contrasts. Portland's vibrant culture and progressive ideals have long defined it, but beneath the surface lies another reality. News footage paints the picture: systemic poverty, rising crime, and mounting tensions that have cast a shadow over its streets. Portland, one local journalist reports, a city grappling with its identity, now finds itself reeling from a tragedy that threatens to deepen its scars. As the city's struggles worsened, Jonathan refused to stand idly by. His work with at-risk youth and his push for community-led initiatives were driven by one simple belief: every life matters. Yet in a city caught between hope and hardship, his commitment to that belief would place him in harm's way. The events of January 13th were anything but random. Jonathan couldn't have known that a routine trip to the grocery store would become his final act of bravery. Nor could he have anticipated that his death would shine a light on darker forces lurking beneath Portland's surface. Forces far more dangerous than anyone realized. In the weeks that followed, the city would learn just how much Jonathan Trent had sacrificed, and what secrets his killers had tried so desperately to keep hidden. To uncover the truth behind Jonathan's courage and the forces that claimed his life, we must start where it all ended, inside the aisles of Fred Meyer. The evening began like any other at Fred Meyer grocery store. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the aisles, casting a pale glow over the neatly arranged products. The faint aroma of freshly baked bread wafted from the bakery section, mingling with the scent of coffee brewing at the in-store cafe. Shoppers moved about with purpose, their footsteps and the occasional clatter of carts echoing faintly through the space. It was an ordinary Monday night, the kind that no one would remember, until chaos erupted. Jonathan Trent had stopped by the store on his way home from a long day. As a father and community leader, he often went out of his way to help others, whether it was organizing youth events or offering guidance to those in need. Tonight, however, his instincts told him something was off. Near the registers, two teenage boys hovered, their restless movements and anxious glances betraying unease. Jonathan watched them from a distance, his instincts as sharp as ever. The argument began quietly at first, a tense exchange between the two teens and a cashier, whose nervous expression betrayed her unease. Witnesses later said it seemed like the boys were trying to purchase alcohol and cigarettes despite their underage appearance. When the cashier refused, one of the boys raised his voice. "We're just grabbing something for my uncle. What's the big deal?" he snapped. The situation escalated quickly. The cashier called for a manager, and the boys' frustration grew. One slammed his hand on the counter, while the other shifted uncomfortably, glancing nervously toward the exit. As the manager approached, Jonathan stepped forward, calm but firm. "Hey, let's take it easy," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. For a brief moment, it seemed like his words might diffuse the tension, but then one of the teens reached into his jacket. Witnesses described the movement as sudden and alarming. Without hesitation, Jonathan moved in front of the cashier, putting himself between her and the boys, his body acting as a human shield. "Let's all calm down," he urged, his tone steady but commanding. "Nobody needs to get hurt." The teen hesitated, his hand still inside his jacket, but then the sound of a gunshot split the air. Bang! The sound echoed, followed by screams and the clatter of shopping carts as people scrambled for cover. Jonathan crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across the tile beneath him. The store descended into chaos, a scene of overturned carts, abandoned bags of groceries, and crying children clinging to their parents. As paramedics rushed to the scene, Jonathan's lifeless body lay as a silent testament to his bravery. The police acted swiftly. Within hours, 2 suspects aged 15 and 16 were apprehended. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, as they were led away in handcuffs. The community demanded answers, but the teens' conflicting stories only deepened the mystery. Teen 1, visibly shaken, claimed the shooting was an accident. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of the situation. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Teen 2, however, remained eerily silent. Clutching a crumpled family photo in his pocket, he avoided eye contact, his demeanor cold and detached. Amid their belongings, detectives uncovered a chilling clue, a cryptic note in Teen 2's pocket, marked with a blood-red symbol. Investigators later linked the symbol to a local criminal network known for coercing vulnerable youth into illegal activities. The discovery hinted at a far-reaching conspiracy, raising the stakes of the investigation. The community was shattered. Jonathan Trent wasn't just a name, he was a symbol of hope, a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. His widow, grief-stricken but resolute, spoke through tears during an interview. He gave everything to save others. "Now we're left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life," she said, clutching a framed photo of Jonathan with their children. A candlelight vigil was held outside the grocery store, the flickering flames reflecting the sorrow etched on every face. Jonathan's youngest child, barely old enough to understand the magnitude of the loss, whispered, "He saved them. Who will save us now?" The words hung in the air, a heartbreaking reminder of the void left behind. Witnesses added another layer of intrigue. One shopper recounted seeing a man in a dark hoodie standing near the scene just before the shooting. He wasn't shopping, the witness explained. He was watching, like he was waiting for something. As soon as it happened, he walked away. The man's identity remained unknown, but his presence raised a chilling possibility. Was he connected to the crime? The questions were piling up. What secrets were the teens hiding? Who was the man in the hoodie? And most disturbingly, was Jonathan's death a tragic accident, or part of something far more sinister? The answers lay buried in the growing complexity of the case, that leaving investigators and the community on edge as they braced for what was to come. The investigation into Jonathan Trent's tragic death began immediately, with detectives determined to untangle the events of that fateful night. Every detail mattered, and every lead was pursued with urgency. The first step was to examine the surveillance footage from inside Fred Meyer. The grainy video captured the tense interaction between the teens and the cashier. Their agitated body language was undeniable. Teen 1 gestured wildly, his frustration mounting with each passing second, while Teen 2 stood silently, his shoulders hunched and his hand in his pocket. The argument grew heated, and then Jonathan Trent appeared on the screen. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. He placed himself between the teens and the cashier, speaking to them with a measured authority that momentarily seemed to diffuse the tension. But then came the moment that changed everything. Teen 2 reached into his jacket, and the next frame showed Jonathan collapsing to the floor as chaos erupted. Detectives scrutinized the footage, pausing and replaying key moments. One detail stood out. A man in a dark hoodie lingered near the scene. His presence was deliberate, his movements calculated. As the shooting unfolded, he paused, turned briefly toward the commotion, and then walked away. Was he simply a bystander, or was he connected to the tragedy? His behavior raised questions that couldn't be ignored. Ballistics evidence added another layer to the case. The trajectory of the bullet, coupled with the proximity of the shooter, suggested intent rather than accident. Forensics indicated that the gun was fired at close range with deliberate aim. This finding contradicted Teen 1's initial claim that it was an accident. Then there was the cryptic note found in Teen 2's pocket. Written in an uneven scrawl, it contained a series of numbers and symbols. One stood out, a blood-red insignia that detectives later linked to a local criminal syndicate known for exploiting vulnerable youth. Experts worked tirelessly to decode the message, believing it could reveal a deeper motive or lead them to the mysterious man in the hoodie. As the evidence mounted, the teens' lives came under intense scrutiny. What would drive two boys, barely old enough to drive, to commit such a heinous act? The answers lay in their troubled pasts. Teen 1, investigators learned, had been living in a car with his mother for months. Once a bright student with dreams of becoming a mechanic, he had been forced to drop out of school to help his mother survive. Poverty had stripped him of his hope, and desperation made him an easy target for manipulation. A neighbor described him as a good kid who got caught up in the wrong crowd. Teen 2's story was equally tragic. Abandoned by his father at a young age, he had been shuttled between foster homes, each placement leaving him more withdrawn. The crumpled family photo he clung to in the interrogation room was his last connection to a father who had disappeared years earlier. A former teacher recalled how he used to sit in the back of the classroom, doodling on his notebook and rarely speaking. He had so much potential, she said, but he never believed it himself. Expert commentary shed light on the systemic failures that shaped these boys' lives. These teens are products of neglect, poverty, and a society that failed to protect them, said Dr. Elena Martinez, a youth psychologist. But does that excuse their actions? That's the question we have to grapple with. While investigators pieced together the case, the community mourned the loss of a man who had given so much. The candlelight vigil outside Fred Meyer became a gathering place for those who knew Jonathan Trent personally and those who admired him from afar. Tearful mourners shared stories of his quiet courage and selfless acts. Jonathan believed in people, even when they didn't believe in themselves, said a former student whose life had been transformed by Jonathan's mentorship. He made me feel like I mattered. His widow, standing stoically before the crowd, spoke of the immense void left by his absence. He gave his life to save others. Now we're left to carry on his legacy, even as we grieve. Amid the grief, anger simmered. Some questioned how the teens had access to a weapon, while others demanded answers about the man in the hoodie. We need to know the truth, said one vigil attendee. Jonathan deserved better than this. The vigil ended with a reflective question that lingered in the minds of all who attended. Would you risk everything for a stranger, knowing it might cost you your life? As investigators dug deeper, unsettling patterns began to emerge. The note, the hoodie-clad man, and the criminal network all pointed to a chilling possibility that Jonathan's death wasn't a random act of violence. It was part of a calculated plan. But who was behind it, and why did Jonathan become their target? The answers remained elusive, leaving detectives and the community on edge as they braced for what the investigation would reveal next. The courtroom was packed as the trial began, with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The prosecution wasted no time, painting the two teens as dangerous individuals who had made deliberate choices that ended in tragedy. The lead prosecutor, Sarah Franklin, stood before the jury with a clear message. This was not an accident, she declared. It was a conscious decision to bring a weapon into that store, to escalate an argument, and to fire a gun, knowing full well the potential consequences. The evidence was damning. Surveillance footage showed Teen 2 reaching into his jacket moments before the gunshot. Ballistics confirmed the bullet trajectory was consistent with deliberate intent, not a misfire. Franklin emphasized the community's loss, reminding the jury that Jonathan Trent was a man of unparalleled character who had given his life to protect others. We cannot allow the justice system to treat this as a mistake. This was a crime of intent. The defense, however, presented a starkly different narrative. They argued that the teens were victims of manipulation by a powerful criminal network. A key piece of evidence was the cryptic note found in Teen 2's pocket, which the defense claimed was proof of coercion. The note's blood-red symbol, linked to a local syndicate, was said to represent a group known for threatening vulnerable youth into compliance. These boys were pawns in a much larger game, defense attorney Michael Carr argued. They didn't have a choice. Emotional testimony from Jonathan's widow brought the courtroom to tears. She recounted the moment she learned of her husband's death, her voice trembling as she spoke. Jonathan believed every life was worth saving, she said. He didn't hesitate to put himself in harm's way for people he didn't even know. Now we're left to fight for justice he can no longer seek. Her words echoed in the silent courtroom, a poignant reminder of the stakes. As the trial progressed, a shocking twist came to light. Investigators presented new evidence tying the shadowy figure from the surveillance footage to the criminal network. This man, identified as Lucas Red Callahan, was no ordinary bystander. Surveillance footage from inside the store revealed him interacting with the teens just moments before the shooting. His body language was aggressive, his gestures unmistakably threatening. Callahan, it turned out, was the ringleader of a syndicate that had been targeting grocery stores for months, using teenagers to carry out thefts and other criminal activities. The coded message in Teen 2's pocket was revealed to be an order from Callahan, warning the boys of severe consequences if they didn't comply. He used fear to control them, an investigator testified. These kids were terrified of what would happen if they disobeyed. Callahan's manipulation of the teens became the centerpiece of the defense's case. They argued that the boys were acting under duress, their actions driven by fear rather than malice. But the prosecution pushed back, pointing out that Jonathan Trent had paid the ultimate price for their choices, regardless of their circumstances. The trial raised difficult questions that resonated far beyond the courtroom. How should society balance accountability with compassion for those who are products of systemic failures? Expert witnesses provided sobering insights into the realities of youth crime. These boys are victims of neglect, poverty, and exploitation, said Dr. Elena Martinez, a youth psychologist. But we must also ask, how do we hold them accountable without condemning them to a lifetime of failure? The community was divided. Some demanded harsh sentences for the teens, arguing that leniency would send the wrong message. Others called for reform, urging the justice system to address the root causes of youth crime. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs with messages like "Justice for Jonathan" and "Fix the system, don't punish the kids." For Jonathan's family, the trial was a painful reminder of their loss. His widow summed up the moral dilemma best during her testimony. "We want justice," she said, "but we also want change. Jonathan wouldn't want another family to go through what we've endured." As the trial drew to a close, the jury faced an agonizing decision. Should the teens be tried as adults, holding them fully accountable for their actions, or should the court recognize the coercion they faced and opt for a more rehabilitative approach? Should Jonathan's murder be unavenged? The weight of the verdict loomed heavy, not just for the defendants, but for a community grappling with its moral compass. The final moments of the trial left everyone on edge. As the judge instructed the jury and the courtroom emptied, one question remained unanswered. Would the verdict bring long-awaited closure or deepen the fractures within the community? As of now, the two teens accused in Jonathan Trent's murder remain in custody at the Donald E. Long Juvenile Detention Center in Portland. Prosecutors are pressing for the teens to be tried as adults, citing the gravity of their actions and the irreplaceable loss suffered by Jonathan's family and the community. Meanwhile, the judge faces an extraordinarily difficult decision, whether to try the teens as juveniles or adults. This ruling will determine the course of the trial and whether justice for Jonathan's death will bring meaningful accountability or leave lingering questions about systemic failure. The weight of this decision is palpable. On one side, Jonathan's family and friends demand justice for a man who gave his life to protect others. On the other, advocates for youth justice argue that the teens are also victims, manipulated by a criminal network and shaped by years of neglect and poverty. How do we balance the need for accountability with the need for compassion? One legal expert asked. This question hangs over the courtroom, keeping the community on edge as they await the judge's ruling. Despite the ongoing case, one thing is clear. Jonathan Trent's death has left a lasting impact. His sacrifice was not in vain, as it has exposed the cracks in the system and sparked critical conversations about justice and reform. Jonathan Trent's life stands as a testament to the power of selflessness and courage. He wasn't just a man who stepped up in a moment of crisis. He was someone who lived his entire life with purpose, guided by a commitment to making the world a better place. One of his most enduring contributions was his mentorship of at-risk youth. Brandon Harris, one of Jonathan's mentees, shares how Jonathan changed the trajectory of his life. "I was spiraling, skipping school, and heading down the wrong path," Brandon says. "But Jonathan didn't give up on me. He showed me that I could be more than my circumstances." Today, Brandon is a college graduate and a community leader, inspired by Jonathan's unwavering belief in the potential of others. Beyond his mentorship, Jonathan's family remembers him as a loving father and husband who balanced his responsibilities at home with his tireless work in the community. His widow has established the Jonathan Trent Foundation, aimed at supporting mentorship programs and community-building initiatives. Jonathan believed that change starts with one person, she says. "We can't bring him back, but we can make sure his legacy lives on." Jonathan's sacrifice has brought to light the systemic issues that contribute to tragedies like this one. The ongoing case highlights the vulnerability of youth caught in cycles of poverty and exploitation. Dr. Elena Martinez, a youth psychologist, reflects on the broader implications of the case. "These teens didn't end up in this situation overnight," she says. "Their actions were the result of years of systemic neglect, but that doesn't erase the pain they've caused." Portland has begun to address some of these issues, launching initiatives to support at-risk families and prevent youth crime. Community leaders have emphasized the need for collaboration between schools, law enforcement, and social services. Mayor Rachel Collins says, "We owe it to Jonathan to create a community where no child is left behind and no hero's sacrifice is forgotten." Despite these efforts, significant challenges remain. Critics argue that the city's reforms are too slow and fail to address the deeper economic disparities and systemic failures that create environments where tragedies like Jonathan's death occur. The community is left grappling with how to balance justice for Jonathan with the need for systemic change. Jonathan Trent's story challenges all of us to reflect on what it means to stand up for what's right, even when the cost is high. His courage and sacrifice remind us of the profound impact one person can have on their community. But it also underscores the urgent need to address the systemic failures that lead to such devastating losses. As the trial unfolds and the community waits for justice, one question remains. When the moment comes, would you risk everything for a stranger? Jonathan did, and his legacy reminds us that while the price of bravery is steep, the cost of inaction is far greater. Please subscribe now. The next chapter won't just keep you on the edge of your seat. It's the one you'll need to hear most. Don't miss out on gripping, thought-provoking stories that uncover truths, inspire change, and demand to be told. Hit that subscribe button today and join a community that thrives on powerful narratives, because the best is yet to come and you won't want to miss a moment.